So we're going to talk about the Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression. Today we're really going to just get started on the Roaring Twenties. So the Roaring Twenties is called the Roaring Twenties because it's an absolutely fantastic time for the vast majority of people. Civil rights is a whole kind of separate issue where things aren't great for some people. But financially, everybody's making bank in the 1920s. It's just, everything is wonderful. It's called the Roaring Twenties just because anybody that wanted to make money made money, and it's awesome. So the reason this unit always goes together, the 20s and 30s, is because the 1920s saw this extreme level trajectory of productivity, of everybody making money, everything's great. And then it gets to the 1930s, and the Great Depression hits, and it just absolutely plummets, and it's the most difficult time in American history. Like, everything just shuts down. This is a decade that it takes place, so it absolutely crushed the economy. But today we're just going to start talking about the Roaring Twenties. So there's an important thing to understand here at the beginning of the 1920s. There's this thing called the Fordney-McCumber tariff. While it doesn't necessarily hurt anybody, it does put us in a dangerous position. Kind of like the long-term causes that led up to World War I. We're looking back on it, we realize it was a bad situation. But at the time, they didn't really realize it. I got a little graph here. All right. So Germany, all right, after World War I, they owed like $33 billion back to England and France. All right. The problem is that they didn't have any way of making money. But England and France, which is the allies here, were demanding money back from Germany, all right? And in $2 billion reparation payments. Germany has no money. They are terrified that if they don't pay England and France will take them over. Well, the Allies, the reason they desperately need this money is because they'd been borrowing money from America. Actually, they've been getting food all through World War I and haven't paid it back. So the Allies, they need to pay their money back to the United States. So that's why they're demanding it from Germany. Germany needs to give it to England and France. England and France needs to give it back to the United States. Well, Germany has no money. So the way Germany is going to get money is Germany is going to borrow the money from the United States in the 1920s because everything is great in the 1920s. All right. So here's what happens. It's called the Fordney-McCumber tariff that sets this whole thing up. The United States, all right, starts loaning money to Germany, all right? Germany takes that money and immediately gives it to England and France, who then turn around and immediately give it back to America. This seems dumb. However, the reason this works out well for America is because every time it changes hands, it's like interest gets added to it. And basically, America makes a whole lot more money in the long run than what we are loaning out. Especially since all that money that we're loaning out, we're getting back anyway. So this is awesome for America. But the reason this is very precarious and is very important for the future of America is the fact that Germany and England and France, which are some of the biggest countries on earth, are 100% dependent on the American economy. This situation right here, all right, this is fine as long as the United States economy works fine. If the United States economy starts to not work fine, then it's going to crush the other countries as well and make a worldwide catastrophe. That's some foreshadowing. All right. So, Fordney-McCumber tariff is going on. Let's talk a little bit about politics before we get into all the fundamental money-making ways and the things that were changing in the 1920s. So typically, politics, and talking about the presidents in the 1920s, or in any era, takes up a huge portion of U.S. history. It really doesn't here, and the reason it doesn't do very much here is because the presidents in the 1920s don't do a whole lot. Everything is fantastic. Everything is great. So the presidents show up at work, and they're like, hey, what am I going to do? Nothing. you're going to sit here, go play golf, go just hang out. Everything's great. Everything went well in the 1920s. The 20s was fantastic. So even being a president was kind of boring. So Harding and Coolidge are the two main presidents in the 1920s, and you've never heard about them. That's actually a good thing. Typically, the most famous presidents are the presidents who existed during a real time of stress and anxiety in American society. George Washington, creating a new country. Abraham Lincoln, the Civil War. FDR, which we're going to talk about this unit, that was the Great Depression and World War II. Talk about JFK was assassinated. You start looking at these presidents that are really well known, and they're usually exist in a time where something crazy happens and there's all this stress on them. That doesn't happen in the 1920s, so these presidents are pretty much not known, and that's a good thing. So the first guy in 1920, and these guys at the time, they're all going to be Republicans. So Woodrow Wilson was a Democrat from 1912 to 1920. When he serves 2 terms, they're pretty much going to go back to having Republicans. And again, still at this point, Republicans and Democrats are opposite than they are today. The Republicans and Democrats then were pretty much the opposite. So the Republicans, these are still more what you would consider the liberal political party would be the Republicans then, whereas the Democrats would have been the conservative party. So President Harding comes in 1920. He doesn't do a whole lot. There's not a whole lot that he does that affects the country, but there is one really important story with President Harding. All right, this is a story that prior to Watergate, which is something that we have not talked about yet, with Richard Nixon. Prior to that, this is the biggest scandal in the history of America. All right, so President Harding comes in. The problem with President Harding is he is an extremely trusting person, meaning he trusts all of his friends more than he probably should. So when he becomes president, a lot of his advisors he is going to appoint to these high positions of power. Not really the patronage type situation, but the people he's going to appoint are just like advisors, people that are in his cabinet and things like that. These people, all right, were his poker buddies from Ohio back in the day. All right, he admits later in life that his biggest problem is trusting people, that he always sees the best in everybody. And so while he's a good guy, President Harding generally is considered a really good guy. His friends are not, and they're kind of garbage. So he appoints all of his buddies to these positions of powers to advise him. All right. There is this guy named Albert B. Fall, all right, that he appoints here. He starts selling government land to individual people. This would be like somebody in the government just selling like a government Humvee to a private citizen and keeping the money themselves. That Humvee isn't the property of the person selling it. Just like this thing called the Teapot Dome scandal, it has nothing to do with a teapot. There's an area of land that the United States government owns called Teapot Dome. There's this dude, Albert B. Fall, who is selling that land, all right, and then keeping the money himself. Once they find out about this, this is a huge scandal because this is completely illegal to do. You're not allowed to do this. And Albert B. Fall gets in a bunch of trouble. He gets kicked out of office and gets arrested, a whole bunch of stuff. But it makes President Harding look really, really, really bad. All right. So the Teapot Dome scandal was the biggest scandal in American history, political scandal, prior to Watergate scandal. And so the Watergate scandal today, again, we haven't talked about it, is when we get to Richard Nixon. Kind of overshadows any other political scandal because it's messing with an election and it's pretty awful. So Harding, once Albert Fall gets kicked out of office, this makes Harding look really bad because Harding, this is his boy. So President Harding looks really bad when Albert B. Fall gets caught. So you would think that the legacy of President Harding would be really bad. But then something happens to Harding, and I got a picture, here's a picture of Harding. Then something happened to Harding that really makes him liked. There's something a president can do, and it's pretty dark, to get people to like you almost instantly. He dies while in office. He has a stroke, and he dies while in office. So if you're a president and you die, your approval rating goes way up. So his approval rating basically started here. All right, because it's the 1920s, everything's good, who cares? Then it goes way down because of the Teapot Dome scandal. Then, when he dies, like, oh, he was a pretty good guy, died serving our country, because he died while in office of natural causes, his approval rating goes back up, but back to, like, neutral stance. So, Harding is kind of a forgettable president. He wasn't a bad guy. His worst decision was probably picking garbage people to help run the government. But he's a pretty much forgettable figure. So for the first little bit of the 1920s, you got Harding, and that's all the politics that's really going to take place on the federal level. So he dies suddenly on August 2nd of 1923, and Coolidge is going to take over. This is Calvin Coolidge. This is his vice president. So there's about a year left in his time in office, and Calvin Coolidge takes over. Calvin Coolidge is going to be a very straightforward, normal president. I say normal. We don't really know. There's nothing he could have done. So in 1924, he's going to run for president, and he's got a cool slogan, man. He's like, keep cool with Coolidge. It works. That's all you got to say. Everything's going great in the 1920s. So in 1924, Calvin Coolidge runs for himself to be the official president, even though he'd been the acting president. He's going to win. So from 1924 to 1928, it's going to be Calvin Coolidge. So from 1920 to 1928, there's very little situations going on with the presidents because everything is going smooth, everything is going good, and there's not a whole lot more to do. So they just kind of hang out. All right. So American business booms. All right. So there's no more Model T Fords. There's all the Model T Fords just stop production. They now come out with the new Model A Ford. Now the Model A Ford was an improvement in pretty much every possible situation. I got a picture here of it. That's a Model A Ford. Clearly has been redone. But the Model A Ford has been upgraded always. The biggest change, though, is you can get it in colors. All right. It used to be with the Model T Ford, you could get it in any color you wanted as long as it was black. Yep, crickets, just like I said it in class. All right. So the Model A Ford comes out, and the biggest thing that people love about it is you can get it in colors. You can get, like, personalize it, I guess, with the different colors, and people really liked it. Then there's this dude named Charles Lindbergh. Now, Charles Lindbergh is famous for one of the craziest reasons. I don't want to say crazy, because what he did is pretty cool. But the fact that he got super famous for this, like he's a special, and he almost becomes a spokesperson in the 1920s. All right. So Charles Lindbergh is famous for not dying. You ever seen the show Jackass with Steve-O? Steve-O is famous because he doesn't die. He does things that should probably get himself killed all the time and then doesn't. And he's famous for it. This is like Charles Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh is famous for flying from New York to London. From America to England. All right? In nonstop flight. Super crazy. First person to ever do it. Absolutely insane. People lose their minds over this. Like, look how advanced airplanes have. Fantastic. And he is like crazy famous for doing this. It surprises me the level of fame. He is a superstar in the 1920s for this. It is really shocking to me that he is that famous, since there's no like unique skill needed to do that. You just have to be extremely courageous, I guess, to do it. But so he flew across the Atlantic and becomes super, because he's the first one to do it. Even though it took no unique skill that probably a lot of other pilots could have done, he was just the guy willing to do it. So Charles Lindbergh, super famous in the 1920s. So this is the Model A. America becomes much more dependent on oil and electricity at the time as well. The more we go to cars, the more we get used to using all types of electricity and oil, especially crude oil, because that's how we power everything. All right, this is kind of I'll move myself up here. So modern advertisement. So this comes out in the 1920s. It says, she was a beautiful girl and talented too. She had the advantages of education and better clothes than most girls of her set. She possessed that culture and poise that travel brings. Yet the one pursuit that stands foremost in the mind of every girl and woman, marriage, she was a failure. End quote. This is a Listerine advertisement. This is, they're saying, hey, yeah, this girl's got everything going for her, but her breath stink, so ain't nobody ever going to love her. That seems absolutely ridiculous. But this is the type of stuff that happens, that starts, the advertisement goes in this way, and it's extremely successful. If you don't think that's true, look at what Axe body spray does. Axe body spray is literally just deodorant, all right? And what they do in their commercials is say, hey, if you go to the grocery store and you buy a can of Axe body spray, supermodels will bust out of the walls and come attack you. And everybody's like, and you see these commercials with stuff like that, and you're like, that's clearly not going to happen. But I'm going to tell you what, people go to the store, guys, mostly, and because that's where Axe body spray is geared towards, and they're going to look at the Axe body spray and they're going to say, hey, I know for a fact supermodels aren't going to break out of these walls and come attack me if I buy this. But just in case, I'm going to buy it anyway. If you think it's not an effective advertisement strategy, if you've ever been in, and I'm only hoping about half of you have, because it'd be creepy if all you have. If you've ever been in that boys' middle school locker room after PE class, it is nothing but a massive cloud of Axe body spray. That junk works. That advertisement works, and that type of ridiculous advertisement strategy, just look at it takes off in the 1920s with this modern advertisement type stuff. Let me move myself back down here. Don't want to cut my... All right. Owned by the man. All right. So this is a new thing, and this is really important to understand when we get to the Great Depression. So everybody has everything that they could want in the 1920s, and here's how they're able to do it. It's not that they own stuff. You can now buy things on installments. So typically throughout time, when you have money and you want to buy stuff, you have to have all the money needed to buy it at the time. In the 1920s, they're going to start changing that mentality. What they're going to do in the 1920s is, like the newest thing in the 1920s is like a refrigerator. Everybody wants a refrigerator because clearly refrigerators are awesome. So if you go to the store, and we'll say a refrigerator costs $100 then, and you have $20 on you, and you show up and you're like, oh, I didn't realize they're going to be so expensive. Oh, shucks, I've only got 20 bucks. The refrigerator salesman says, hey, I tell you what, you give me that 20 bucks now. I will let you take the refrigerator home. All right. And you get to use it. You just, every month, you have to keep paying 20 bucks until you reach that $100. You just pay in installments, but you take it home now. You take the refrigerator home now. You just pay it off over time. This idea of installment plan buying is really, really interesting. Because what allows people to do is take home stuff they don't actually own. So you're taking home a refrigerator, okay? When you take that refrigerator home, you get to use it and all that other stuff. You still have to make your payments every month. If you make 3 payments, so you paid $60, and then you stop paying it, what happens is they come and take that refrigerator back from you. You don't get your money back, all right? They keep the $60 and they have the fridge, and they'll sell the fridge to somebody else. The reason this is important to understand is while you can make all your payments, it's absolutely fine to do this. The problem is these people don't actually own any of the stuff they're buying because they're just getting it on the installment plan. So what is going to happen is as long as they can make their payments, they're fine. But say you lose your job or you have no way of making money, all this stuff that you feel like you own, whether it's a car, whether it's a house, whether it's a refrigerator. I mean, and in the 1920s, they're doing this on everything. Your furniture, everything in your house. They didn't actually own anything. They were just making payments on it. If something happened where everybody in the country lost their job at one time, which is absolutely going to happen in the Great Depression, not really what's happening now because we're just like quarantined for a few months. We're talking about something that's going to last years in the Great Depression when it hits all of a sudden. That they're going to lose absolutely everything. And it's going to be incredibly devastating because most of the stuff people had in their house during the 1920s was being bought on an installment plan, meaning they were paying it off as they go. So the motto here was enjoy while you pay. But what happens in the 1920s is the vast majority of people become more and more in debt. And they don't actually own any of their stuff. So once everybody's like almost instantaneously going to lose their job across the board in the Great Depression, they can't make their payments and they're going to lose everything. So in the 1920s, this is a new idea, very, very common. But what it does is it puts a whole bunch of people in debt and they don't actually own any of their own stuff. All right, the Roaring Twenties. So there is a big thing that's going to happen in the Roaring Twenties, and it has to do with Prohibition. All right, so Prohibition in the 1920s is the 18th Amendment, which makes alcohol illegal in the United States. All right, it's kind of crazy. So there's been this movement, if you remember, called the Temperance Movement, where they're trying to limit the sale of alcohol to people in the United States, or just eliminate alcohol in general from the United States, and it's been going from the 1800s. By this point, just before the 1920s happens, the United States agrees collectively. There's like 80% of the people in America said, you know what, you're right. Alcohol causes nothing but negative things in the United States. Let's ban it. We changed the Constitution. We don't pass a law. We fundamentally changed the Constitution. It's called the 18th Amendment, all right? Which happens, if it helps you in your mind with timelines. Remember the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote, happened in 1919. So you know the 18th Amendment had to happen before that, so this happened in the 19-teens. They're going to officially outlaw alcohol in the United States. Alcohol is illegal. It is really weird how this happens. So like 80% of the United States population wanted to make alcohol illegal. All right. As soon as they make alcohol illegal with the 18th Amendment, the United States is like, yeah, woo, we did it, everybody. Let's go have a beer to celebrate. And they're like, yeah, hold on now. You can't do that because it's illegal. And they're like, what type of dictatorship is this? And immediately, when you tell the American people they can't do something they were used to doing, people freak out over it. The 18th Amendment becomes incredibly unpopular extremely quickly, which is just bonkers because so many people supported it when it originally came out. What happens, though, is that once they make alcohol illegal, people just go through and just start breaking the law. Like they just blatantly we're going to do it anyway. And it causes a huge issue in the United States in the 1920s because of Prohibition. So Prohibition is the 18th Amendment. Basically bans the sale, manufacture, transportation, anything having to do with alcohol. So Prohibition, 18th Amendment, makes alcohol illegal. The Volstead Act was created in order to keep it from supposed to be enforced by the Volstead Act. So they knew this would lead to more crime when they passed it because more people were going to break it. However, they didn't realize how many people were going to break this law and continuously break the law. So the Volstead Act provided more money to help enforce the 18th Amendment, but it was drastically underfunded. So there's just no way to keep up with the massive amount of people that were going to break the law. So this is a cartoon. This is a cartoon that supports Prohibition. So this is why people wanted to make alcohol illegal. So this is like the Hun Rule Association, which typically means German. Huns are typically just a term for the whole culture of German people, and beer is very commonly comes from Germany, especially back in the 1920s. So these are some of the reasons they think they should get rid of alcohol. We make people poor. We cause poverty and crime. Talking about the beer does this. We are against progress. We rob women and children. We fill penitentiaries and asylums. We waste grain. You're like, wait a minute. Did the artist just like run out of good things to say and good ideas when he's comes up with this? Keep in mind, in World War I, all right, when a lot of this originated, there was a huge food shortage because everybody was fighting and not working. So the idea that you would be losing food was actually a pretty pertinent thing at the time. All right, breaking the law. So there's two things here that's going to happen. All right. Or that you need to understand. So speakeasies was a term given for underground bars where people would drink illegally during Prohibition. So this doesn't actually mean they like dug bunkers in the ground. When they mean underground, they mean secret bars. So because it was extremely illegal, you had to do this in secret. You couldn't just go to a bar in the middle of a downtown area, because it would be extremely illegal. And then if you see any movies in the 1920s, there's always the cops come rushing into the bar and everybody scatters like a high school party. So speakeasies, this is where people would go and they would drink illegally. It was just a name for like an illegal bar. They use the term underground, but it doesn't actually mean it was like under the ground or in the basement. Even though I'm sure some of them were. It just means it was secret. This just seems insane to me. Like, how in the world, and this is, let me get myself out of the way here. This is a random drawing of a speakeasy. So it's like super fancy in this picture and glorious. I don't know. And they're called speakeasies because you had to be quiet so people didn't like hear about you. How in the world you try to keep a bunch of drunk people quiet? I have no idea how that was possible. It must be why in every movie they always get busted up, because they must always get caught, because that just seems impossible. All right, so the next one, bootleggers. This is cool. All right, so bootleggers are people who provide alcohol, I guess. For the most part, bootleggers are people who are going to transport the alcohol. So this is really cool. So what car did everybody drive at the time? That's right. It's the Model A Ford. They had just come out. They're super awesome. So everybody drove the exact same cars. Your civilians, your cops, everybody drove the same type of car. All right. So let me back up before we start talking about the cars, because that gets really cool. So bootleggers is a term for anybody who would illegally manufacture, distribute alcohol or anything like that. So where that term comes from, everybody has their own version of it. The one I like the most is the story that people would buy. You could buy fancy boots from Italy, just a single coinky dink that Italy is shaped like a boot. And people would also buy fancy women's boots from Italy. But so if you bought the boots from Italy, so Italy is like one of the main winemakers in the world. And keep in mind, alcohol is only illegal in America. The rest of the world is not an issue. So wine mass produces wine. So somebody figured out that if you buy these fancy boots from Italy, all right, and they ship them over here on boats, to keep the leg holes opened while they're being shipped over across the Atlantic, what Italy would do is they would put cheap bottles of wine inside the legs of the boots, right, to keep them opened up so they wouldn't fall on top of themselves because it was a fancy leather. So this is what would happen is people would realize that if you bought these boots, it would show up with alcohol. Italy not even thinking about the fact that alcohol is illegal in the United States. So what people end up doing is people start to buy these boots just for the alcohol. Even though the boots were expensive, the 2 bottles of wine that would come with them were drastically worth more than the boots themselves. So they would buy these boots in droves just to get the alcohol in order to be able to turn around and sell it or drink it themselves. And that is one of the theories as to where the term bootleggers comes from. This is one of those weird things. There's like 15 different versions of where the term bootleggers comes from, and everybody that has their own version is like, this is where it came from. I can't tell you definitively of exactly where the term bootleggers came from, but I have heard that story and I like it the best. So that's the one I told you. But it's one of those things you can't prove one way or other definitively, probably because it just caught on. When people started hearing the term bootlegger, they connected it to different things. So nobody is like lying when they tell you where it came from definitively, but everybody's going to have a different interpretation of it. All right, so let's talk about the most famous bootleggers. So what would happen? Typically Canada. You could go to Canada and ship stuff into Canada or just buy the stuff in Canada, alcohol, and then you could deliver it to the rest of the country. However, you had to come across the border in Canada, and when you came into the United States, if you're all loaded up with all types of kegs of beer and whiskey and wine, the police are going to see that, and they're going to stop you because they know people are doing this. But here's the thing. If you're a bootlegger, guess what kind of car you drive? You drive a Model A Ford. If you're a police officer, guess what you drive? You also drive a Model A Ford. There's no CBs. There's no radios. There's no way of radioing ahead. If a police officer tries to pull you over on the road in the 1920s and you get away from them, you won. Like, that's it. If you can outrun them, you won. So what would happen is these bootleggers, they would soup up their cars, their Model A Fords, as absolutely best as possible. So I'll go back and show you. Let me find my picture of my Model A. They would soup these bad boys up right here to go as fast as possible so they could outrun the police while loaded down with a whole bunch of alcohol. So it doesn't take long that the bootleggers in the United States have the fastest cars around. So I imagine there's a whole bunch of bootleggers sitting at a speakeasy somewhere, and they're like, I got the fastest car. No, I got the fastest car. And then somebody else is like, hey, all 40 of y'all think y'all all got the fastest car. Here's how we're going to decide it. We're going to go outside. We got a 1 mile track, only making left turns, and we're going to race. All right. Now, if somebody gets too far ahead, we're going to stop everybody and let you catch back up, because that seems fair. But what I'm getting at is the origination of NASCAR, all right, is actually from bootleggers souping up their Model A Fords during Prohibition, and that actually created NASCAR. Can you take it's called stock car racing, so different than how it typically is now, but it's where you could go take the exact same car and you can do whatever you want to it in order to get it to be faster than everybody else's. Today, like, if you look at the cars they use in NASCAR, you can't go buy that from a showroom anywhere. But in theory, and I say that about every year. Somebody will tell me that in theory you should be able to, but obviously with safety and stuff like that, we've kind of moved on from having just like the typical cars that are on the road and everybody gets the exact same car, and what can you do to it to make it faster than everybody else's. That was the original concept of NASCAR racing, which is stock car racing. But stock car racing got its start with bootlegging. All right. And then what we got? Boop, boop, boop. Oh, real gangsta. All right. This is a dude named Al Capone. You talk about a gangsta, all right? Now, I don't want to glorify this guy. He is a massive sack of crap, and he murdered a bunch of people, all right? He is an absolute awful human being. And so what I think captivates people is the way that he just clearly broke the law in front of the eyes of the entire country and didn't care, and you couldn't catch him because he was extremely smart. Now, did that include murdering people? Yes, it did. So I do not want to glorify Al Capone in any possible way. But the reason he is so captivating is, so this is in Chicago, the city of Chicago, which is kind of the hub, if you remember us talking about previously, where all the trains go in and connect. So Al Capone, he basically ran any of the speakeasies. He owned them and ran them and organized them, as well as really any illegal activity, prostitution and other things. So what he would do is he would bring in everything into the city, and he would run all, and he made tons of money. I mean, he was worth millions and millions and millions of dollars in the 1920s doing illegal stuff. Everybody knew he was doing illegal stuff. The problem was he was so rich, he would just buy the police. The police like worked for him in Chicago. It led to this massive level of corruption. Chicago historically and sadly has a like huge history of corruption. Something crazy, and I don't want to get this wrong, but since it's being recorded, it's like on here forever. If you guys want to look this up and tell me, that would be super awesome. And that'd be great. Something crazy like 5 of the last 7 governors or mayors of Illinois, governor of Illinois or mayor of Chicago, are in prison right now. Chicago has a history of corruption. So the fact that Al Capone in Chicago owned the police isn't a huge shocker looking at Chicago's history. Not only that, he was like a very public figure. Like he would just ride around. He had like an armored truck. He had a diamond, or I think it was a ruby, that was so big that when he wore it on his ring finger, it would like cover these other 2 fingers. It was like worth like millions of dollars. But he was just out every day. So the United States government knew he was out doing shady stuff. So they sent in like the FBI and stuff to investigate him. This is where you see all these crime movies where they're trying to tell somebody, they don't want them to know they're there, and the guy just like gets out of his car and like walks over to him and says hi to him. This is what Al Capone would do. He'd stop at a donut shop, get a whole bunch of donuts, and come out and then go right over to whoever's following him and give them the donuts and be like, hey, you guys want to talk? Like, what's up? So all this crime keeps going. They are like following him every single day. They had to create an entire task force in order to catch Al Capone. He is 27 years old. All right. So he does this all in his 20s. He's young. I know he doesn't look 27 here, but they must have aged faster back then. So Al Capone, they never could catch him on all this negative stuff. So what they do is they end up arresting him because people kept dying. Awful things kept happening. They're like, we got to get him off the streets. So they put him on trial. Nothing that he is doing, like his books are meticulously kept him separated from his business. The only thing they can do is prove that he had made like $10 million. All right. And they couldn't prove that he had made it illegally, but they had proved that he had made $10 million. He wouldn't tell them how he made the $10 million. So, since he won't tell them how he made the $10 million, he's never paid taxes on those $10 million. They convict him in court of tax evasion. Now, typically you get convicted of tax evasion, you get a hardcore slap on the wrist. If it's super bad, $10 million, you probably do go to jail for a year or 2. This dude goes to jail for 25 years. That is like the maximum sentence you could possibly give to somebody because they realize that this dude's a bad guy. Gotta get him off the street. So Al Capone goes to prison for 25 years. He's at Alcatraz, like the most famous maximum security prison. You're going to actually have an essay about that later on in the semester. So Alcatraz is where he's at. He actually doesn't die in prison. He gets out at 53 years old. And you're like, oh, the story continues. It's not really that great of a story because he gets out at 53 years old, and within a year he dies of a massive heart attack of natural causes. But Al Capone is kind of the symbol of prohibition, of just this organized crime, which became a huge issue across the country. He was just the most famous one for the organized crime across the country.